our work carries values to the audience. While a lawyer or an accountant or a plumber or, anyone that is in business has certain ethical obligations they need to consider. In our case, the content has ethical implications, and that's a whole other layer of looking at what content are you accountable for. Are you happy with the content you're helping make possible?
Welcome back to the Act One podcast. I'm your host, James Duke. Thanks for listening to our little podcast that can. If you enjoy it, please subscribe and leave us a good review and share it with your friends and your family and your neighbors, cousins, nephews, dentist. Our guest today is the Assistant Executive Director of the WGA West and former chairperson of the Act One board, Charles Slocum. Chuck Slocum, as I call him, is an Assistant Executive Director at the Writers Guild of America West and previously worked at Paramount, NBC, and ABC. He has a BA from the Newhouse School at Syracuse University, an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and both an MA and THM in Theology and Film from Fuller Seminary. In our conversation, Chuck and I cover the WGA, its recent dispute with agencies, ethics in Hollywood, and the recent shift with Act One becoming a part of MasterMedia International. We cover a lot, but I think this conversation will be especially helpful for anyone wanting to know what the Writers Guild of America does and how it helps screenwriters. I hope you enjoy. Chuck Slocum, thank you so much for joining me today. It's good to see you, man.
I'm happy to be here, Jimmy.
I want to talk to you about some different topics today, just for people who maybe don't know you very well, which I know most people know Chuck. You're just a lovable Chuck Slocum. Everybody knows you, Chuck. No, but for those that don't, you have been the chairman of the of Act One for chairman of the board of Act One for how many years?
Most of its 20 plus year history. There were a couple years in the middle where I was on the board, and Barbara Nicolosi, our founder, was actually the chair for a while. But I've either been on the board or the chair of the board for all of Act One's existence independent of Hollywood Press. For the first little bit of time, we were part of Hollywood Presbyterian Church and didn't have a board. And so I was on the faculty for that period of time as well. But ever since we had a board, I've been either on it or chair of it. And it's been a wonderful ministry to be a part of, very fulfilling and rewarding set of students and faculty. And I've been very, very happy and very blessed to be able to be part of it.
And of course, you have been chairman during my tenure here. And we've been friends for a really long time, back since the beginning. You are now have been a part of this new transition. So we are in the midst of celebrating now this new transition that Act One is now a part of MasterMedia International, which we've recently announced to everyone. Something we're really excited about. You've been a part of, you and the entire board have been a part of helping me with getting all that ready. And this is exciting time for Act One. This is kind of a great launch into, we had our first 20 years, and this is kind of a great launch into the next 20 years.
Yeah, I agree completely. This is an exciting time. As a board, we have been trying to figure out the future for Act One. We're stable, and we've always been able to pay our bills and run our programs, but we didn't have quite the heft to really grow. It's been hard to launch new things and to look for to fulfill new ministry opportunities. And what we realized is that our existing programs are just not quite big enough to support the resources necessary to grow. We have enough resources to do what we do, but growing beyond our current scope to fulfill some of the mission opportunities that we see has been hard. And as we thought about it and looked at what we might have to try to build, it became clear that what MasterMedia does and provides very much fills those gaps in our capabilities. And, MasterMedia has said that we seem to fill gaps that they have and serve their long-term goals of their expansion. And it just became clear that ministry together was stronger than ministry apart. And through analysis, but also, of course, prayer, all the leadership of the two groups just saw in each other exactly what we each needed, and very much felt God's lead that working together would be the strongest way forward.
Absolutely. I I've been really impressed with Dan Ruppel's leadership and the members of the Master Media Board, and they have worked so graciously with us, and it's been wonderful. Just you know, this has been about a 2-year process, wouldn't you say? And we've spent lots of time in prayer and conversation, and going back and forth on a lot of different things, and it definitely seems as though God has been leading us to this point. And like you said, it's the right partnership at the right time, and we're really excited about this opportunity. And there's a lot of great, exciting things coming down the pike, and opportunities that Master Media and their relationships provide for Act One. And so a lot of really great, exciting things coming. You work for the Writers Guild of America West. Can you explain what you do for them? And you, because you originally start, if I remember correctly, did you originally start at the Guild as the publisher of, or editor of the magazine?
No, I didn't start there as that, but I did do that along the way for a while. I started doing what is still probably my central duties, which is that I advise the Guild about strategy, and especially about strategy in the entertainment industry, so that we understand what the studios and networks are doing, and what their business looks like, and how their business is changing, so that we can make sure that writers get paid well and appropriately. And I have a business degree, and I started out at ABC Network doing Nielsen Ratings analysis, and I worked at Paramount in finance. And then the Guild was looking for someone to advise them about entertainment industry strategy, and I found out about it, and it seemed like it was a good match at the time for me and them. And now, 33 years later, it's still a good match. I have taken
33 years you've been at the Guild.
Yeah, 33 years. It'll
Wow.
be 33 years in April of 2021. And I think I can translate the strategy of the industry into terms that apply to writers and how they work and how they get paid. And I've added a lot of management responsibility over the years. As you said, I was publisher for a while. I currently supervise the residuals department, the membership department, the diversity department, and a couple other IT department, a couple other things. Over the years, I've done other things. I renovated our Writers Guild Theater twice, and spent a year buying 3 new elevators for our building. And so I've done a lot of different things at the Guild, but at the core of it is always our negotiation and our enforcement. And so that always takes us back to, how are the companies paid, and what does that mean for how writers should be paid? And it's fulfilling work. I feel like I'm getting writers money every day, or better working conditions. And so it's been a great job, and they've been good to me, and I hope I've done good service for them over the many years. And I didn't expect to ever go work for a Guild. I kind of thought of the Guild as something that existed out there in the industry, but I didn't really know much about it until I went there. And I thought I'd be at the Guild for a year. I came in to help them with the 1988 negotiation, and I thought, okay, I'll go do this for a year, and then I'll see what I want to go do. And I ended up staying
For 33 years. That's impressive. It's actually, you don't hear that actually a lot out here. So that's
it's somewhat rare.
Are you from Los Angeles originally?
No, I grew up in New Jersey, and I was raised in the Methodist Church, and went to Syracuse University undergrad. I just kind of stumbled into that in their television and radio program. I the guidance department said, look up what you want to study and see where you go to study it, and they didn't pay a whole lot of attention to my future. And so I looked it up, and I found out you could study television of all things. Who knew? And so anyway, I applied, I got in, and studying television was completely different than whatever I thought it would be. But as it turned out, I really liked it. And I enjoyed the business aspects of TV. And I also enjoyed considering the sort of the social impact of television. Just when I was studying television, a young teenager named Ronnie Zamora had killed an elderly neighbor of his in Florida. And his defense was that television made him do it, that violence on TV had desensitized him to violence and caused him to use an excessive amount of force, resulting in the death of his neighbor. I forget what mischief he was up to in the apartment, but it resulted in her death. Anyway, that was his defense. It didn't work. He was convicted, but it raised for me at that time, when I was an undergrad, the question of the social role of television and what is it. There was a lot of attention on the effects of TV violence on kids at the time, and there always, has been consistently since then too. Anyway, when it came time for a career, I found opportunities on the business side of the industry, and started out in New York. And they moved me to LA, as it happened, a rare opportunity, and one I took advantage of, and moved out to LA. But it was all along the business direction. I've got an MBA later. I had the other jobs I mentioned, and it scratched the itch of the business side of the industry, but it never really did come back to the social significance of television and film. And that coincided also with sort of the rise of my faith. I very much came into my own faith in college and after college. As I said, I was raised in the church, but I kind of took it as just a part of life. I didn't have a personal faith. I didn't have a commitment to my faith that I would say that I had decided to pursue or commit to until after college. A couple events, caused me to have that commitment develop. And so then I began to look at the interest I had in the social significance of film and TV through the lens of my faith. And I began to wonder, what does it mean to be a Christian in film and television? And I looked around. This was probably the late 80s, maybe even the early 90s. And there were not a whole lot of resources. There were ministries out here in Hollywood, and I got involved in those. And when I wanted to look at it in a more rigorous way, I looked around. There weren't really resources on it. I decided, well, I guess I'm going to have to go to seminary and figure it out. And so I did. I enrolled at Fuller Seminary. Happily, it's conveniently located here in Pasadena. And it was the perfect place to do this exploration, both because it's a multi-denominational seminary. And so you're not limited to sort of an existing body of scholarship that is sort of committed to one point of view within Christianity. It's open to all sorts of perspectives, and thus is very able to look at something as different as a theology of film. And in fact, just as I was seeking out my own education in this, the folks at Fuller were also adopting that as an agenda of their own. And I was there for a few years before I knew anything about it, but they were developing the Brehm Center and their curriculum in film and television and theology of film and television out there. And so midway through my program out there, I was able to switch into the new degree programs they just created, and found all these courses that I, just wanted to take, and found a lot of like-minded people out there. And it really became a place where I could develop my thought and begin to have a theology of film and television that I that I believe in, that I think is consistent with how I read the Bible. Not too many years after that was when Act One started. And Barbara wanted me to come talk to the Act One students about the Guild and what it's like to have a career in writing and that kind of thing. And I said, I'll do that if you also let me teach a class on the theology of film. So anyway, she agreed to that, and I started teaching both of those two things. And then my MBA skills became helpful more on an organizational level, as I said. And when we spun off from Hollywood Press, I was involved in helping do that spin-off and whatnot. But my heart really has been as a faculty member for Act One, and I've enjoyed teaching. I'm happy to talk about the Guild. I'm happy to talk about a career in writing or in producing since the beginning. And I'm also happy to talk about a theology of film. What has been wonderful to see is that throughout the church, people have become much more interested in and open to and thinking about Christians in culture and Christians in entertainment and Christians specifically in the creative roles in film and TV. And so now, unlike when we started out, there's just an unending list of Christian professionals who can teach for Act One and who are thoughtful about it. And also theological thinkers who are able to think through all the theological questions. So it's been wonderful to see that the faculty develop, our leadership develop, and it's just been a wonderful ministry experience for me that has for now 20 years paralleled my professional career.
That's great, Chuck, and I completely echo that. I always enjoy when you come in and oftentimes we have you talk about ethics, business ethics, kingdom ethics, and the paradox. And I don't think we discuss that enough. And that's why it's always good to talk about that. And there is a paradox as being a faithful, committed follower of Christ in a business that oftentimes encourages you to not have integrity. It encourages you to look out for number one, not necessarily for other people. And I mean, clearly we've seen the consequences of that over the past couple of years in the industry with things like the Me Too movement and so on, and seeing the, for lack of a better term, the depravity that the way many people have chosen to work, many people, the way they've chosen to treat other people in this business. And it's always been justified by success, and talent has always been elevated above character in this business. I think talent has always been elevated above character in probably every business, but since we're talking about the industry, I'm just curious if you could, from your perspective, what is it that, because my argument is this is an area that we have failed as followers of Christ in this business. We haven't done a better job being different and being distinctive in the way we act, in the way we treat one another. Just curious about your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I agree completely that talent is elevated over character and ought not be. I mean, I tend to think of these issues in two categories. One is professional ethics and using our Christian values as the base for deciding on what's ethical or not in the workplace. And that's a topic that is explored in the context of many different industries, and in some ways you can look at standard business ethics and Christian ethics for business and apply them to our industry. We have a few quirks and specific situations that are a little different because we have things like one-on-one meetings a lot more maybe than some other industries, and situations where people can be vulnerable, like with intimate scenes being filmed, and the creative requirement of the project requires some intimacy, and that could be exploited, and people can be mistreated in that. But there are a lot of resources for that, and we just need to adapt those to our industry. To me, one of the things that is less common and is shared with a few other industries or careers, but is present in our film and television context very prominently, is the fact that our work carries values to the audience. And so, while a lawyer or an accountant or a plumber or, anyone that is in business has certain ethical obligations they need to consider, in our case, the content has ethical implications. And that's a whole other layer of looking at what content are you accountable for. Are you happy with the content you're helping make possible? Even if you're just on the crew, should you work on a film that you disagree with morally? And it can be very hard to know what to do in those situations. And it can also be hard because you could commit to a project based on one script, and then one rewrite later, suddenly you're midway through production and you don't agree with the morality of this script anymore. And yet it's pretty harsh, perhaps unethical, to quit a production in the middle, particularly if you're a key person, to quit a project in the middle of production. I mean, it's certainly almost unthinkable for a performer, right? To quit a movie or a TV show mid project because you're on the screen and suddenly your absence creates a major problem for the production. It's a little easier if you're, on the crew, or, even if you're the writer, maybe even the director or producer, but it's hard to leave the project. So it creates a gray zone, and you have to figure out your name's going to be on it. In the case of a performer, your face is going to be on the screen. And then here's this story that you now don't agree with. So anyway, there are a lot of professional, ethical situations that we need to think through. I think that the accountability, to the extent that you have power in this situation, or you're writing it, or you're directing it, or producing it, that the accountability is for both the depictions on the screen, which is what draws the most attention publicly. Usually something's on the screen and somebody objects to it, but also you're accountable for the point of the story, the meaning of the story, the moral of the story. What's the value communicated by the story narratively? And I think that we as Christians are also accountable for that. And we have to think about it on both levels. We can't let the discussion only focus on the depictions, but you can't justify all depictions just based on stories. Sometimes you have to also limit what is depicted and tell the story a different way. And then there are the middle ground of professional ethics that are important and somewhat distinct, like what experience are you going to put an actor through in the story of film or TV show that you're producing or writing or directing, and then all the traditional ones of treating people well. And as you say, our industry doesn't even get those right usually.
Right.
No, I wouldn't say usually. Often our industry, there are times where people are not treated well.
Yeah.
And so you have to watch out not conforming to the ways of the world in that respect too, on top of all these much more idiosyncratic moral questions. And so I think that, ethics is just, theology applied to life. And so there's a direct line from what we think theologically to how we carry out our lives and careers in Hollywood. The big picture goal for me of Act One and MasterMedia and the whole church in Hollywood is to populate Hollywood with Christians. And sometimes that means Christian films, what we would call Christian films or Christian programs. But it always means our faith impacting our work. And so in the workplace, in how you relate to others, in the stories that you tell, how is your work going to be different because you're a Christian? And to me, that's where the rubber meets the road in terms of our ministry and the challenge to the church out here in Hollywood. How is your work going to be different because you're Christian? And it's rarely a simple answer.
No, it's rarely a simple answer. It's almost always not a simple answer. And the distinction, I think, comes in our choices. I think some of the frustration that people experience is when given the responsibility and the opportunity to make those choices, is when it sometimes feels like there are Christians who don't consider their faith or don't consider the theology applied, if you will, the ethics of the situation when they make those choices. And so it's almost as if, why do we even want people at that level if once they get to that level, they're not considering the distinctions between us and everyone else, or at least what should be the distinction between us and everyone else. We should be thinking differently about these things. We should be thinking differently about the power dynamics. We should be thinking differently about casting. We should be thinking differently about the way we treat crew members. And sometimes that doesn't happen. And it begs the question, why? For you, have there been tools, I mean, other than obviously scripture itself, have there been tools and resources that you would recommend to people to say, look, these are things that you could use to help you think differently about your Christian distinctiveness in the industry?
Yeah. Well, yes, I think that, you're right. The industry is not waiting for us to make our moral decision about a project or how to work. And so they're not going to say, okay, you're all right with this morally, right? No, they're not going to ask that question. So we have to keep that front of mind and make sure that we are considering all of that. I think that every Christian in the industry has to be as prepared as anyone else in any other career to think individually and independently about theology and ethics. Or another way to put it is to what you believe the Bible says. So we have to be students of the Bible, as you say, scripture. The Beatitudes are important, but all the stories of the Bible are important in communicating values. We have this idea of a red letter Bible, which has all the words that Jesus spoke in red. And when I look at it, I think, well, that's not what should be in red. What should be in red are Jesus's actions, what he did and what other people do, and what people do in the stories that are offered to us, either as Bible stories of things that occurred or in actual parables. What do the people do, and what values does that communicate that are pleasing to God? And if you can develop a personal theology of virtue, a personal sense of what is right and wrong, all starting with the golden rule of doing unto others what you would have them do unto you, and going from there to be more specific. Always put yourself in the other person's shoes and see what you think you would want to be done to you, and use that kind of framework for deciding. I think that's vitally important. There are going to be times when you're the only Christian in the room, when you're the only one making a moral judgment about how long the shooting day is going to be, or what scenes are going to be in a movie, or how they're going to be shot, or what experience the performer is going to have, or how anybody's going to be treated financially. And so you need to bring that to your career and be prepared. So that, as I said, means studying the Bible. It means small groups. You have to have a resource for yourself to be grounded spiritually. You have to be well developed spiritually. And you have to be able to find the resources, find the community that can help you think through the issues, whether you have to call somebody, right away from your small group in a situation, or just long-term, where you begin to develop the conversation about that. So I encourage small groups. You can find those resources at your local church. I also encourage that for industry groups. So if you have a small group, it might be helpful to have other people from the industry in the group. Maybe not exclusively, maybe it's good to have some other voices, but if you can have some other people who've faced similar situations, that would be good. So that's, use the Act One alumni as resources, our faculty as resources. One of the strengths we have is that, professionals who have done this, who are artistically excellent, but also have dealt with being a Christian in the industry, are our faculty. And they're a resource. So anyway, find those resources for yourself in your career, and be ready to be spiritually independent. You have to be spiritually mature to avoid some of the traps of our industry that the industry will just put out there and not even think about.
Let's transition over to the conversation I wanted to have with you about the Writers Guild, the kind of the tension that has existed over the past couple of years between the guild and specifically agencies. We were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. I believe it was around 2018 when the guild said, hey, something's not right here. We need to fix this situation. I wonder if you could, because I know you've been a part of a lot of these negotiations and a lot of these conversations. I wonder if you could take us back to the beginning and kind of walk us through all the way to where we are today. What happened? What was the impetus that led to the Writers Guild saying we want all the writers to drop their representation, and we need to create new deals. We need to structure a new system here. Can you take us back? Was it 2018 when all this began?
Yeah, it was 2018 when we first notified the agencies that we wanted to renegotiate the agreement through which they have the right to represent writers. This had been a problem before. I mean, it's almost a standard industry comment that the agent doesn't return my calls, the agent doesn't always put me up for jobs. And writers had known for a long time that there were sometimes conflicting interests that watered down their representation, that where other interests came to play, not just their own individual professional interests were being considered. And everybody, I think, was doing well enough that never bubbled up in recent decades. It actually had been an issue. It was an issue in 1962 when MCA had to split the agency from Universal Studios, and they chose to be a producer, and they dissolved their agency. It was an issue in 1975 when the Guild tried to do exactly what we've done now, which is end packaging fees with agencies, because packaging fees, where an agency receives payment directly from the employer rather than the 10% commission from talent, means that the agency is being paid by the employer. The agency is aligned with the employer. The interest of the agency comes from connection and pleasing the employer, not the client. And this idea that agencies work for 10% of what their clients earn applied in less than half of cases of clients, because clients on a packaged show didn't pay the 10%. The agency got the packaging fee. So this had been a problem. I think that, as in TV in particular, as the season orders became shorter, as we've seen over the last 7 or 8 years, where a 10 to 13 episode order is an annual order for a show rather than 22. I think TV writers felt that resulted in them being paid less, and the agents didn't solve it. And so that's when writers came to the Guild and said, this is a problem I'm having. My agent's not solving it. And it was because, if those 10 other episodes go to a different writer, the agency still got a packaging fee on 22 episodes, but the one writer only got paid for 10 of those. And so there was no incentive on the part of the agents to up the fee for the writer to compensate, because the 10 episodes still took the writer's whole year of work. It was very hard. It's very hard to piece together a year of work on more than one series.
Yeah.
Even
It was
at 10 episodes.
it was almost worse because it would be like maybe 1 month less.
Yeah.
And so it was like this awkward, instead of having 9 months of work and maybe 3 months off, it would be 8 months of work and four. It was like this weird.
Yeah, and you couldn't fill the other 3 or 4 months
Yeah.
with other work, and so you
Right.
ended up still being off just still took a whole year because the work did expand. The weeks per episode expanded to take the time available. But writers get paid by the episode typically. I think it's better if they got paid by the week, but they're paid by the episode, and so they got 10 episode fees instead of 20. Well, you're making half what you made the prior year. So anyway, writers came to us and said, this is a problem. And it was clear that packaging fee structure was part of it. And we realized that between packaging fees and by then agencies were starting to actually be producers, that was a problem. And writers said to us, we got to fix it. And so, we did. And, it took 2 years. But throughout that whole time, we've been negotiating with different agencies, and one by one they've come on board.
But it was pretty earth shattering, wouldn't you say? I mean, it really did reshape a lot of things, and because essentially the guild was saying, like, no more. Like you drew a line in the sand that now agencies and studios and producers, everyone had to react, everyone had to respond, everyone had to choose a side. And there was a lot of unhappy people with the guild at first, even some of your own, right?
Yeah, even some members were not bothered by agents earning what I would call would be an outsized return for their work, or having a conflicted interest. But the community of writers as a whole understood the problem and supported the campaign. You say the guild. The guild as an institution doesn't do anything that its members doesn't want it to do. So I would almost replace the words the guild with the community of writers. The community of writers decided that they didn't want their agents to get packaging fees, that they wanted unconflicted representation, and that agents ought to earn 10% of what their clients earn.
And so to explain the mechanics of it, when you guys came out, when the union came out with the statement, right, that it had not yet been voted on by the members, but it was like your executive committee that represents them. Is that right?
Well, the members voted on it when they fired all their agents.
Right, but that came like this. The statement came first, right?
Yes, but we knew that the writers supported it. So they had expressed themselves enough that we knew that the vast majority of writers supported the campaign, supported the goal.
And so, just for an understanding though, just for people who, the Writers Guild of America has is it called an executive committee? Is that?
Well, we have, I guess, our board of directors. There was a negotiating committee for this particular purpose. There's the board of directors of the Writers Guild East and West. There's a separate board in New York, and they act collectively, essentially. And
in other words, it's not just one guy sitting in a cigar smoke-filled room, just saying, I want to do this, I want to do that.
No, not at all. It's the opposite of that. I mean, basically, legally, the guild is the exclusive bargaining representative of writers under labor law, and as a result, we control all that bargaining. And so agents can only represent writers to the extent that we permit it, because it's a part of our mandate to represent writers.
Right.
And
correct.
we have for many, many years allowed individual representation by agents, but within the terms that we agree to. And so, when writers came to us, we actually did a survey at one point, and it became very clear that writers were bothered by this conflict of interest on the part of agents of packaging fees and producing. And so we had a good read on a pretty broad group of the membership and what their feedback was. The board of both guilds took that up and agreed that we should do this action. And then it was expressed, the will of the membership was expressed when it came time to fire their agents and say, look, the representation agreement is now terminated and you can't represent writers anymore. And all the writers filed their individual papers to terminate their representation agreement with their agency. And that was when, 99% of writers fired their agents. The other 1% were, retired and we couldn't reach them by mail, or they didn't return their ballot or their paper or whatever. So it was, virtually unanimous action. And that simply expressed the will of the membership that we already knew was there. And and then as it turned out, we negotiated with agencies throughout the last 2 years, and modified what our original proposals were. But we've reached agreement that writers are happy with, and that agencies are happy with too.
I don't know what all you're allowed to share, but like the latest big domino to fall was CAA, and they've now signed on. Prior, what was the holdout? What was the holdout for the big guys? And I know there's still one domino that hasn't fallen. What were they saying? What was the problem they had with what the guild was asking for?
Well, I think that it's fair to say that the big agencies didn't want to give up the packaging fees and didn't want to give up the ability to produce. And they would argue that it's good for clients because they create opportunities and it saves the client's commission. But they had to eventually understand that writers did not like the conflict of interest. And so we have either the elimination of packaging fees or the limit of 20% ownership in a production entity that's in the agreement. And those are the terms on which writers were willing to re-engage agencies. So I don't want to speak for the agencies any more than that very high level view of it. But the idea is that there's a broadly used concept of fiduciary representation, where you have to be able to put the interest of the client above all else and not have it conflict with any self-interest. And it's common in banking, it's common in insurance, it's common in the medical field, it's common to representation in Hollywood. And it's not an unfamiliar concept, but it was not usually observed in our context. And all we've sought to do was put the fiduciary responsibility of an agent back at front and center.
Going forward, are there any significant hurdles going forward at this point?
No, as we record this, writers have a lot of agents that are available to represent them. And, as we speak, the vast majority of agencies have signed, and it's the new normal.
There are several religious Christian, trying to be careful here, but production companies and large production companies and producers of content that are not signatory. They almost braggadociously do not hire guild writers. I know there's a place in our business that exists, that needs to exist for that, but it also seems a little disheartening and somewhat troubling to me that it tends to be, some of these people tend to be people of faith, and they tend to make very overt faith-based projects. Any thoughts on that? I know you've been a part of these conversations for a while.
Well, I guess I would say two things. One is if a Christian producer does not want to hire guild writers, then they're just cutting themselves out of access to some of the more successful writers. And so that's a choice that they make. I don't think that's a good creative choice. But they have to look at that choice that they're making. There's nothing the guild requires that they should not already be doing, right? Everything that they should be treating people well in a way that exceeds anything the guild requires in our contracts. So if I put my Christian hat on and say, what's the guild require? I'm going to say, well, that's if you're coming up against what the guild requires, then you're right near the edge, and you better actually look at what you believe ethically you should be doing, because you should be treating somebody either creatively or financially in a way that exceeds whatever the guild is requiring. I think that producers that aspire to the highest levels of creative and financial success should have no problem working with guild writers, and should want to work with guild writers, and should be able to sign the guild agreement with no problem. Look, it pains me greatly when, even in the guild context, I do see creative Christian companies who end up on our list of grievances. I mean, I look down the list of companies that we have a problem with, that writers have a case with, and there's a list of all the names who are producers in the industry, and I just hate it when I see a Christian company on there. It's a horrible witness, and it just shows that there are cases where Christian producers will treat people in the industry as poorly as non-Christian companies. And as a Christian, my comment to those producers is, what witness are you putting out there? How have you made these decisions to treat people poorly? And this just shouldn't be a case. Just shouldn't be a case. So I challenge Christian producers to exceed all the professional standards for conduct in the entertainment industry. And they should never feel constrained by the entertainment agreements. They should always be doing more and better.
What do you say to the writers who say, I can't afford to be in the guild? I would rather take that $10,000 pay, that $10,000 job to write that, because I can't afford, no one's paying me that larger number that's gonna allow me to be in the union. What is your response to them?
Well, I have two thoughts for that. One is that I understand there's a whole usually independent film sector. There's not much independent television. There's a little bit of streaming, but it's really webisodes, not real series. There is an independent film sector, both Christian and non-Christian, that are non-guild, and that I understand that, and that's fine. And those are people usually at the beginning of their career, it's an area where I understand people need to start there. And usually, as someone has success, either a writer or a producer, they end up wanting to work with guild covered writers or for guild signatories, and they come under the guild coverage, as they appropriately should at that point in their career. Now we have low budget agreements, and so it's also true that almost all productions can be accommodated by a guild contract that both the writer and the producer can live with. And so I don't see our contracts as an impediment. If you want to pay a writer less for a certain project than what the guild requirement is, I think you got to think about, what you're paying the writer. And as a writer, I think you got to think about whether you're selling your creative work too cheaply. Are you letting them off the hook? Yes, there's a low budget sector where that happens, usually in the beginning of a career where it's not guild. But once someone is working steadily, they're worth what the guild wants for them.
You talked about some of the different responsibilities you have. One of the things that the guild does, obviously, is it defends writers who maybe have a claim against them for plagiarism or something like that. How does that typically work out for writers? Are there a lot of cases where that come to you guys of people claiming that their material has been stolen or compromised in some way, that you guys are having to go to bat? And are these things that are often resolved out of court, or are you guys having to go to court? Like, what's the process in representing writers in those cases?
Yeah, one of the main things we do is enforcing the contract. I mean, uh, we probably have 2 or 3 new cases every day, every business day, of some writer not being paid enough. It's not usually theft of material. It's usually not being paid. Occasionally having some rights infringed, but it's usually about being paid by your employer. And now more than 80% of those cases will settle. The ones that don't settle go to litigation. The litigation is almost always in arbitration. We have a private arbitration system with a list of arbitrators in our contract that the companies have agreed to and we've agreed to. And we go through the list and pick an arbitrator, and they hear the case. They get experienced in our contract and get to know the types of disputes that we have. So they're not just someone who's unfamiliar with the entertainment industry. And if we have to, we will arbitrate. All this is done for guild members just as part of their normal dues. There's no extra fee or anything. And as I said, 80 or maybe even 85%, maybe more, of the cases settle because it's usually pretty clear what the writer's owed. Honestly, most of the cases are difficult because it's where the company is not paying the writer and they may not have the money. And so it's not really a legal issue. It is a collection issue, and we have to work out payment plan or whatever. But yeah, there are a lot of cases. I mean, it's relatively small compared to, the number of writers working. But there are a couple cases every business day that come up, and some settle very quickly. Some take, a while because they do have to go to hearings and briefs and all that. But we have a whole legal staff that does all that, and they work at the whole length of the case. They work it from the initial phone call to gathering all the facts, to trying to settle it, to having to litigate it. And in some cases, the problems will bubble up and become an actual proposal in our every 3-year negotiation with the studios. If it's really something that isn't clear under the overall basic agreement, we'll actually have to negotiate something new in the basic agreement, and we'll do that. So yeah, there are a lot of cases. There definitely has to be an organization like the Guild that can take all these cases and is not trying to earn a fee for each case.
Right.
The problem with paid legal representation per case is that the small cases fall through the cracks because they're not worth the time, they're not worth the money. And we'll take those cases because our funding comes from dues overall. Writers collectively throw in their dues, and then we, pursue these cases as well as all the other things the Guild does to administrate the contract or provide other activities and benefits to the members. But that way we can address even the small cases where writers owed $500. We take that case as seriously as if they're owed 500,000. And whereas a lawyer probably wouldn't take the $500 case, or the writer would decide it's not worth paying $600 to get $500, and the producer gets away without paying it.
Right.
That doesn't happen in our case. We'll go for the $500, believe me.
That's funny. How many writers does the Guild represent? What are the current numbers?
I would say nationwide it's about 15,000 who are members in some way or another of the Guild, and are out there working to some extent or another. It's probably half that work in a given year, but
so that's I want to make sure people hear that, Chuck. So
yeah,
15,000 union members and in the community of writers, but probably around 50% of them work in any given year.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Now, if you look at it over a 5 or 6 year period, it's much more like 85% will work. So, it's very typical to have.
And that's on account of, and is that on account of feature films?
Well, feature films too, but TV also. TV does result in a somewhat steadier career, because once you're on a show, you're most likely to get picked up if it gets renewed, and most shows last, a couple seasons. So television is a little more stable. So the rise of television relative to film has made a career a little bit steadier. But yeah, it's half and in a given year, and it is 80 or 90% over a 5 or 7 year period. And some of those who are not working over that period of time are retired, because we do have lifetime members who retain their membership for forever, but are sort of truly retired. And but it's a tough career to get into. It's just as hard to get the second job as the first job. It takes a long time of writing, a lot of experience to write. As I tell the Act One students, it's going to be your fifth or your sixth or your seventh completed script that's going to sell or get you work. And it's going to be just as hard to get the second job as the first job. And so when you're starting out, you got to plan your writing career. Then you got to plan how you're going to make a living, because your career is probably not going to be how you make a living for the first 5 or 7 years. Now, if you can, knock out the scripts and learn from them and get it quicker, you can shrink the amount of time it takes to launch a writing career. But you got to get good enough. The good news is a new writer entering the industry competes with every other writer for every job. So there's definitely a way in. We let in one new member every day of the year. Actually, these days, probably more like 2 every day. And so you can get into this career, but you're competing with every other writer for every other job. And that means you also got to be good enough to compete with every other writer. And that other person has already sold 5 scripts and probably written 20. And you got to be you got to be good enough to compete with that. So yeah, it's a tough career. You have to love the writing. Actors often talk about the job is auditioning. And when you actually get a job, that's the bonus, and then you can enjoy it. You have to look at writing the scripts. Sometimes, especially in the beginning, just spec scripts on your own. That's the job. And when you finally sell one, that's the bonus. And so you have to love the writing. And you have to put the time in front of the word processor to get those scripts done. Get good enough and network and do a lot of other things, but you have to get good enough fundamentally in the writing craft in order to get into the career and then succeed in it. Our hope, obviously, at Act One is that we can help people accelerate that a little bit by giving them training, and so they can be excellent, and also give them a bit of a network so they can work their way into connections and getting meetings. And so hopefully we can play a positive role in that for Christians and call Christians to be the most excellent, so they cannot be ignored creatively, and give them some connections so they can find the opportunities. And so that's why Act One's been a very gratifying ministry to be part of for so long.
Your timetable is a little bit shorter than mine. You said 5 to 7. I tell people 10.
Yeah.
So if they can manage it for the first 10 years before they get their first job, then they've got a good shot.
Yeah, but it's the good news is it's up to them, because to me it's really 5 or 6 or 7 completed scripts that they would show other people, and you can do that. You can do that in 3 years if you want. You can't do it much faster than that, but you can do that much work faster if you really spend those evenings and those weekends writing that script, or do it every day when you're off work, work around your work hours. You can do it faster, but you have to get good enough, and that does take time.
And the only people who are going to do it faster are maybe people who have writing partners. But
writing partners can help. Writing partners is a good option for extroverts who want to be writers. Introverts who want to be writers can be great at the writing part. They need to work out the meeting part and all the networking part. That's going to be the harder part. For extroverts, you can turn the more solitary task of writing into a more interactive process by having a writing partner. I think you have to figure out what your personality requires, and make a decision about the writing partners. Or I think in some cases a producing partner could be helpful if it's more about the business stuff. But you got to figure that out. That it can be a very important part of the process. On the other hand, in the case of a writing partner, you're splitting all the money. So
Right, right.
you're going to earn less
You're
too.
so you're more attractive to the producer who still is paying the same amount, and he gets two writers for the price of one.
Well, that can be true on a television staff where they have two bodies in the room for one.
Right.
In the case of the script part, the writing of the script, it's almost irrelevant to the producer because they're getting one script for the same price. They're rarely going to be willing to pay more because it's a team, and so they're getting a script for the price. And if the writer can produce that with a partner, that's fine. Hopefully, that means you can maybe produce more work if you're a pair of writers working as partners. But yeah, you got to figure that out, and that's a choice. It does have economic and creative consequences.
Yeah. I didn't ask probably just a really basic question, maybe for some of our listeners, which is how does one get into the Writers Guild of America?
Yeah, we'll be there when it's time. Basically, you get into the guild when you get a guild covered job. So you get hired, you'll get in. You do not need to already be a guild member to get a guild job. As I said, you compete with every other writer for every job, even before you're a guild member. What the contract says is that if a guild signatory company hires a writer, that writer must be a member or become a member. So if you're a non-member, you'll get the job, and we're going to call you up and say, "Hey, welcome to the guild," and you join. And there's no inhibition other than getting the work. And so you can start working right away. And in fact, you have to write about 2 hours of content to get in. So if you sell an hour script, you probably got to sell the second one before you'll join. Depending on, there are different pieces of work that all count toward membership. But in the simplest way to think about it is writing about 2 hours of content or 2 episodes of TV to get in the guild. But you work and you get coverage under our contract. If all you do is sell 1 half-hour episode, you're going to get the residual when that repeats, on TV, because the work is covered by the guild, even if you never join. Now you write the second one, then that's the time to join. And then there are additional benefits of being a member, but basically you're covered under the contract from the get-go.
You used to often, when you would speak at Act One, you would talk about the why Act One. And I used to really enjoy hearing how you would talk about the need for Act One and the why for Act One. We might have some people listening today who maybe are considering taking the Act One program, perhaps this summer. For you, Chuck Slocum, you've been a part of the Act One community for years and chairman of the board. Why Act One?
Well, I guess I would think about it in a couple categories. The first thing is that you're going to find Christians who think about the same issues that you do, and have been doing so for a while, and have some resources to help you think through those questions. You're not going to find that many people in your local church who can help you think through some of the issues about being a Christian in film and entertainment, and how to work through some of the questions you're going to have. So you're going to find like-minded people in the Act One community. Hopefully, we can also do the acceleration that I talked about, which is accelerate your learning curve, both creatively and in terms of more theologically and ethically, about how to be a Christian in the entertainment industry, because we address it in the curriculum, and we have the programs available, the educational programs, also the alumni activities, and that will help you learn more quickly some of the things you must learn. I think that one of the strengths of our program is that as you learn to write, which there are a lot of places where you can learn how to write film and TV, you'll be doing it with Christian professionals who have thought about some of the special issues that will come up writing as a Christian. It also then plugs you into our Act One network. Our alumni are one of the strongest resources we have. We find that the community of each class of students is very strong, and it persists throughout people's career. And then participation in the wider alumni group also can create new contacts and ways of understanding things or learning things or finding contacts to get jobs. And the other thing for people who are outside of LA already that we did at the very beginning, because it was very hard to find, and it's a little more common now, but I think for some people it's still necessary, is that we can demystify LA. We can make it easier to come here. You're going to come here. You can be part of a Christian community for the program, and we can just demystify the whole idea of moving to LA. When we started 20 years ago, none of the Christian colleges were having a semester in LA. Even the secular colleges mostly did not have a semester in LA or a couple-week summer program in LA. It was very unusual to have that. And so we were able to offer a program where a Christian out in the heartland could come to LA and learn LA, learn how to get around, learn how just what is out here, where to live, just get familiar with it, break the ice on it being such a big deal to move to LA by coming out here temporarily. And we facilitated it, and it made a big difference. So now a lot more of the Christian colleges have some program like that. So it's not as necessary. That sort of demystifying LA is not as pervasively necessary. It's still necessary for some people who don't have the opportunity to take advantage of that kind of program. But I would think of us, for people who have been out here, we're a little bit like a grad school for your career as well. So even if you've done one of those seminars, I think while the demystification might not be the value is in the acceleration of your career. So the why is that life as a Christian is always better in community, and we're the community. And we love that about Act One, it's sort of I think the core touchstone for everything we do is, does it serve us as our purpose of being the community of Christians in Hollywood, particularly for writers and producers, although we've got a bunch of directors among our numbers too. Combined with all the local churches out here and the other ministries out here in the industry, it's a rich and deep community. And I just love the role in that community that Act One can play.
Chuck, this has been fantastic. I think anyone listening to this is going to come away with just a wealth of knowledge and a real encouragement to keep pushing the boulder up the hillside, and know that they don't have to do that alone. And you have been a part of leading this community and having a voice in this community for a really long time, and you've been a blessing to a lot of people, and me included. So I just want to thank you for today, and thank you for all that you've done for Act One over the years, and all you've done for Christians in Hollywood, and on all you've done for writers through your work at the Writers Guild. So thank you, my friend.
Well, thank you. And it's been a blessing to facilitate in some small way the careers of others, and to create some opportunity for community. I look forward to continuing to participate in the ministry at MasterMedia. I'm going to be part of their board. Act One, some of the Act One leaders are going to join the MasterMedia leadership as well, and so it really is a combination of two great ministries that have different strengths, and the combination of those strengths can produce even more fruit of the Spirit. And so it's been very gratifying for me, and I look forward to more and more of being blessed by being part of this community in the future.
Thank you, my friend. I like to close all of our episodes with praying for my guests. Would you allow me to pray for you today?
Thank you, please.
Okay, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for my friend Chuck. Thank you for his friendship. Thank you for his leadership. Thank you for his kindness, his generosity. God, he has been so instrumental in so many people's careers and lives. He's been such a blessing to so many. And I'm just grateful to you for him. I'm grateful for the way you have used him to help steer and guide Act One over the years, and just impacted so many writers and filmmakers and producers. And thank you for his commitment to you. Thank you for his commitment to the gospel and the work of your kingdom. And God, I just want to pray a blessing upon him and his life and his work. Pray that you would continue to use him at the Writers Guild to serve writers. And God, I pray you would continue to just give him opportunities to represent you well in our industry. And we love you, and we thank you for all these things. We pray this in Jesus' name, and your promises we stand. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for listening to the Act One podcast, celebrating over 20 years as the premier training program for Christians in Hollywood. Act One is a Christian community of entertainment industry professionals who train and equip storytellers to create works of truth, goodness, and beauty. To financially support the mission of Act One, or to learn more about our programs, visit us online at actoneprogram.com.